Hi again, and welcome back to our last session of this month's Masterclass, where we have Dr. Shelley Sommerfeldt. Hi, Shelley, how are you?
Hello, doing very well, thank you.
Well, we have a beautiful topic today. I'm really excited to talk about this because we are going to talk about happiness. And I think that is the ultimate thing we are all looking for. We're always trying to achieve that, right? I think that should be our main goal in life. What do you think?
Right, yes. Well, I definitely think it's something that everybody is looking to achieve and find. And obviously, when there are times in our lives when we aren't happy, we aren't feeling well, it can really bring down all the aspects of our lives, our work performance, our relationships, everything, including our physical spaces. So I think it's going to be a really interesting topic to discuss how clutter and disorganization really leads into our mental health and our overall feelings of happiness.
Yeah, I'm very concerned because I think we are living a time or a culture of we're very success driven, no? So we have so much stress from work, looking great. We have to have the perfect relationship, the paying job. We think we will achieve final happiness when we have our huge house and the car and the vacations and the children and, and sometimes we forget what, when people start accumulating and having things. In my case, what I work for as a tidying consultant, I find that people have maybe have their huge houses. They even have these storage units where they have it packed and filled with so many things, but at the end they're still not feeling happy.
Right.
So what do you see in your clients?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So many people now, this obsession with materialism as much as just driven by success and certain things in our life. And it can take people a while to figure out it's not those things that actually bring us happiness. But we can get caught up in exactly what you're saying, having the big house, having this ideal world when it isn't necessarily those things that bring us that joy. And when people will often come into my office that they don't understand why they aren't in a happy place, that they are feeling upset, sad, stressed out, whatever it may be, because oftentimes the focus is in the wrong direction. Say that it is on materialism or getting a promotion at work or success. And what often happens is this demise with our work-life balance. We are so focused on work that we've let our family relationships fail, our friendships are falling, our health, our just overall life outside of work is failing, but yet we got the promotions at work and we're making so much money, but people are not finding their overall cumulative life experience is actually bringing them happiness. Oftentimes people get so caught up in a pursuit of happiness that in of itself can be a real challenge. And we oftentimes see such a connection with mental health issues in particular. And that's an interesting thing as it relates to clutter. We can see, obviously, if somebody's experiencing depression, for example, they're not going to be in a state of wanting to organize and clean their house, right? I mean, if somebody's experiencing depression, they're really in survival mode of getting through each day. And when you're talking about a serious mental health condition, it's hard to then look at your physical space and look at other things. So that can really impact, especially if there's clutter around and somebody's experiencing depression, they're not going to feel the energy or motivation to organize that. But then just that appearance of clutter in of itself will also contribute to the depression. And the same as anxiety, and we talked about this before, that clutter, that presence of clutter creates so much stress, and it can, again, as we discussed in that first session with the brain, it triggers that fight or flight response. It raises our cortisol levels. So that can also really contribute to feeling stressed out, feeling overwhelmed, and overall anxiety. So for me, as a mental health professional, I think it's fascinating how much just having clutter in your space can impact your overall happiness, but also in addition to more serious mental health conditions that get exacerbated by having clutter as well.
Yeah, that is so true. I work with the physical spaces of people, and sometimes it's hard to explain to them, or for them to see that all these material things that they have don't really make them happy. And other people might think that when I achieve all of those belongings like other people have, and I will achieve that happiness. But yeah, as you said, people have to be ready for this process of tidying, of wanting to go through this process, that it is hard, it is tiring, especially mentally. I was talking to, I gave a workshop on Friday, and it was so amazing when people were saying, yeah, I feel exhausted at the end, and it was not the physical, but more of the mental, which we have been talking about.
Right.
So, yeah, I think people who have a circumstance in life that has brought them to this point where they say, you know, I no longer want to feel this way, I no longer want to live this way in my space, then they decide to start this process. And I think the best way is to have a clear objective on what you want to achieve. As I said, I don't think there's like one method of reaching a decluttered home. I think there are many. It just depends on who. And I will give you, well, I will share with everybody what I try to use and what I try to teach my clients on how to achieve this decision-making process. But I think, yeah, this is a habit, no, that we all can, as we said in previous sessions,
right.
Being tidy is a habit you can learn. And as you taught us, it's something that when you repeatedly do it without even thinking about it, then that's when it becomes a habit. So I have learned that, and now I teach it. But yeah, I think when we are committed, when we have clear objectives on what we want to do in life, then we can start this process.
Right. Yeah, and in bringing up the habits, I think that's an important thing to tie back to, even though we have discussed it. But when we look at, again, clutter of our physical space and how that impacts our mind-body relationship and well-being, that's also a really huge piece of it, and that ties into having really healthy habits. And as we discussed before, it's often seen, and there's several research studies that back this up, that people who have very cluttered spaces tend to engage in really poor habits, and one of the most common is eating of junk food and really poor health. And so it's commonly seen that if somebody's in a very disorganized or cluttered space, they're often overweight, and it's as high as 75-80% of the time. And so that connection with just our overall happiness and how we're feeling, and how that ties into cluttered spaces and creating a nice space for ourselves. But exactly as you're saying, with kind of starting with an objective, I mean, it's an overwhelming process, both physically and mentally, emotionally. So, but once we get on that road of kind of decluttering and organizing and overall feeling better in our life, it has huge impacts, including our mind, body, and our physical health. Another piece for me is, again, that stress. Once somebody starts decluttering and they're able to clean up spaces and get rid of things that maybe focus more on materialism and are not bringing them happiness, they are able to then feel less stressed. They're not seeing as much as the clutter, you know, and junk around, where they're making better decisions for themselves, not just about organizing their home, but their overall life. I mean, it really has a ripple effect of our happiness.
And that also ties in perfectly with relationships, and how when we start this process, I have always seen people have in the workshop I gave on Friday, some people are cluttered, no, and some people are very organized, and they
Right.
want to, but they want their problem is, oh, my children, no, or my spouse or my roommate, they're not tidy. So how do I make them?
Right.
I always tell people, this is a very personal process, and not everybody is in the same, mindset as you are. I mean, it would be wonderful if they are. But I also find it that when I finish a tidying process with somebody, normally they're kids, or they tell me, they come back to me, or I've even had kids as clients. It's really funny, where parents say, now my kids want you to come in and do this same thing with them in their room with their toys, and we do the whole category thing. It's been really amazing experience to work with children. But I always tell people, don't worry, you have to do your process, and then like this energy, and since you're like, you're not stressed anymore, you seem so happy, well, then your spouse sees that in you, and then they call me back and they're like, well, my husband or my wife, no, they call me back, they're like, I don't know what you did to her or to him, but I want to feel the same way. So I
Right.
get back, no. So it is one of the benefits of being and having a tidy home, or
Right.
a space, workspace too. As you were saying in our last session, how when we were working about work environments and productivity, how when you have someone working beside you who's like full of clutter, how you can't also concentrate. So it is something that I always say, it helps everybody but you have to do the process first. No, you can't start by saying, well, I want him to do it. No, you start doing the process, and you'll see that you're like everybody. And then also like your friends come over and they're like, oh, how beautiful, I want to do that too. No, so it creates like this nice energy around.
It's true. It's almost like a positive peer pressure in a sense. And I love this when I do work with couples. This is exactly the philosophy that we take, that is, let me have each person focus on themselves. What can that spouse do to better themselves? Because when they do that, it absolutely has a ripple effect to the other person. And most people come in, especially couples, and they're ready to point the finger. My spouse is doing X, Y, and Z wrong. And while they may be correct, you can't change another person. And so one of the best things you can do is focus on yourself. And then that, again, has this ripple effect. And so I love that idea. And I think you're right. It's not just intimate relationships. It's also parent-child relationships and work relationships. But if somebody in your workspace is noticing, you have a clean space, you're more productive, you're doing better at work, that might also, lead them in a positive peer pressure sort of way to move in that direction to do better for themselves. So I think it does have a really positive energy and can be impactful. The other thing about relationships that I think is seen so often, and at least I've seen this in my practice, where people are coming to me about a particular issue, but then they're letting their friendships and their relationships fall to the side because they're so overwhelmed with, say, projects they have to do at home. I'm thinking of a specific example of somebody who had a lot of clutter and disorganization in their garage, and it was overwhelming to them. They had boxes and boxes, and they had lived in their home, I think, 7 years, but they had really never unpacked the garage, and it was overwhelming. And that may seem simple to some, but as a result of that, he was letting, like, people would invite him, friends, to do something on the weekend or, hang out, whatever it was. And he was declining relationships and experiences because he wanted to go and unpack and organize his garage. But when it came time for him to actually do that, he wasn't able to follow through. So he was turning down relationships, not decluttering, and then really missing out on an opportunity to have healthy relationships. He was sort of isolated at home, overwhelmed by the disorganization and clutter. And one may not notice that, again, about how clutter is impacting relationships, that it can be so overwhelming that they don't have enough time sometimes to even spend with people. Mm-hmm. And again, when we're overwhelmed mentally and have a lot of clutter in our minds, it can also be hard to, when you're with somebody, focus one-on-one. And that's another component to kind of bring up about relationships and the importance of decluttering your life, because it can be, if you're at lunch with a girlfriend or having coffee with a friend and you can't really attend to the conversation, or you're not really paying attention to what they're saying because you're going through a mental checklist of things you need to do at home or things you need to do at work, it really does impact the quality of our relationships as well. And clutter plays a direct role in that, surprisingly.
Yeah, well, I think when somebody encounters that situation, which a lot of people do, they just don't know where to start, how to start. And then, yeah, I always tell people, I try to teach them, normally we think we're going to set aside Saturday, and we're going to do like the garage. And then they end up exhausted and frustrated at the end of the day. They did not go to the movies with, or they did not go to this social event that everybody is hanging out, and you weren't able to do your garage anyway. And so it's like double loss, no? So I do tell people, I do some strategies on how to start a tidying process. It's something that will take time. You need to plan it out according to, this is where like it's a tailor-made suit, no? It depends on the time you have available, how committed you are to the process. And that's when a tidying consultant comes in and can help you achieve the objective, no? That when you can't do it on your own, you can always look for somebody, also a friend who's also in the mindset and has the same thing, and you can have like an accountability partner, which is something I always invite people to try to do too, so that they can be motivating each other. Look, what did you do today? How did you get it done? How do you feel, but I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I love to talk about and that I follow as my practice, there are so many things today, especially minimalism. No, it's sort of like in vogue. Everybody talks about minimalism. I don't know if minimalism is for everybody. I don't think it is. It is not for me, at least at this point in my life. I think I practice more essentialism. There's a book by Greg McKeown. I think that's how you pronounce it, Greg McKeown. He talks about essentialism, and so essentialism is basically living with less things, but living with the best things you can have. So yes. A clear example is, why do we have 100 pairs of shoes or 100 purses when we can have 5, 10, 15? There's no real like exact number. It depends on how much you use it, and we will talk about this at the end, where I'm going to give you my tips on how to decide what is essential in your life. And that, I think if we reach that mindset of what is essential in my life, what is important. Marie Kondo, I think it's the same thing. She talks about what does spark joy in your life. So keep what sparks joy in your life, and the rest, have the courage to let it go. So I think it's the same thing. I concentrate more on the practice of essentialism, where, have the things that you want to have, but have less things, because, and what's essential for you in your life and your reality, it's not the same thing if you're a 6-figure family, like 4 kids, 2 parents, or if you're 2, or if you have little kids. It's so different from each family environment, what essentialism means to each one, no?
Right. And what's important. I mean, I really love that, because again, I think that comes back to this idea of letting go of materialism and actual things that we think will make us happy, when in reality that our happiness is usually not based in a pair of shoes we own or a thing that we have. And so it's really more about focusing your time, your experiences, your overall balance with life. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's very popular, Marie Kondo's idea of spark joy right now, which I think with what you're saying with essentialism, it ties directly into the same concept of really looking through what we have, and is it essential to our life? Does it bring us joy? Is it something that we need? And I think the idea of minimalism is definitely intimidating for some, because especially for people who like various hobbies. And we do know that hobbies really increase our happiness as well. And it can be a great strategy if you're going through depression, anxiety, or relationship difficulties, to really engage yourself in a hobby and an activity. But sometimes hobbies bring a lot of junk. They can. I mean, say you're into, arts. I mean, then you're going to have a lot of supplies. And so sometimes it isn't necessarily getting rid of everything and living with the most minimal, environment possible. I really like this healthy balance of essentialism and what things are essential to how we're functioning right now. And you're exactly right. If you've got small kids, you have a lot of stuff often, that not just toys, but survival things like bottles and diapers and whatever it may be. And so everybody's life stage can be very different as well, depending on what they're experiencing. But I love the idea just of getting away from the focus on possessions and materialism, and more about our own happiness and balance and what we're doing in our life. In terms of time management and our relationships and experiences.
Yes, my clients, after we do a tidying process, they always say that the first thing that changes in them is if they were those type of people that go out just shopping, the way they shop, they become more conscious about because as we work in the consultancy. They see how they relate and what things they buy and why they buy them. They actually understand more this buying habit, and they call me back and they say, going out shopping is not the same experience after we do the tidying process with you. Why? Because we're more conscious about what we're buying. We really say, am I buying this because I'm in the wrong mindset, as we spoke, at the beginning. So they start saying, and I always say, start buying more experiences instead of things, because that will make you more happy. And they actually do, they stop going out to shop just because they need to fill an emotional situation that they have. And they start looking for other things, which also ties in with what we were just talking about. Then they have more time. You really, of the 4 benefits of a tidying process, I always say you have more time, because you're not out shopping and buying things that you no longer need. So you have more time to spend with your family or doing a hobby. Also the economic,
right.
You're no longer like buying so many things because you know what you have at home. You're not buying the second or the third time the same thing because you can't find it, because sometimes you don't even know that you already had it. No. I have had clients find like 2 of the same shirts or so much toilet paper, or they're because they have things just everywhere. And they start saying like, oh my God, when did I buy so much shampoo? So it's when you do this tidying process, you are so aware of your buying habits that it changes so much, and it brings this economic benefit. And then well, we could talk so much about this, but I think we should go into giving people some strategies and tips on how to, I know we all know we need this.
Right.
We all go into this process, but sometimes we say, well, but how do I do it? Well, you can call a professional organizer or a tidying consultant and get some help. I think one of the tips that I could give people is to fractionalize tasks. And that's something I think you taught us, Dr. Sommerfeldt, because once we understand, and this is why it was so important for me to have you on and to talk about brain, because it has so much to do. I mean, if we understand how our brain works, we can understand so much about habits and how we think and how we make decisions and how we procrastinate and all these things. So I think one of the things that I would say is to fractionalize your tasks. And how do you go about this in a tidying process? I always say, and that's something that I've learned from Marie Kondo, is to do it by category.
Right.
Because that is a way of fractionalizing your things, and you can see how much time you really have. So one day you can just like go and hit your pajama drawer, and tidy that, and then go from there. Start from small and then go to bigger tasks depending on how much time you have available.
Right.
And when you have like these small wins, you start feeling more comfortable, and more confident about the process. And it's more likely that you will be successful.
Right. I mean, I love that, because I think compartmentalizing makes it less overwhelming. I mean, one of the most common things, and as the example that I gave of the man who goes into his garage, he ditches all of his friends, goes into the garage, it's overwhelming. And then people end up not making change, or they don't know where to start. So really fractionalizing, breaking it down. And again, as we tie that back to the brain and understanding that our brain also gets completely overwhelmed and overstimulated, that the brain naturally needs to compartmentalize things into categories, so that directly correlates to how you would address clutter, I think is essential. One tip that I would give, that's not so much about our physical space, but more our mental space and our mental health and overall emotional functioning, is to really look at your whole entire life balance and think about all the different areas. And all of these areas represent a metaphor for how you're feeling and functioning within yourself, your emotional and mental health. So I think the key here for me is that your space, your physical space, can absolutely be a metaphor for how you're functioning mentally and emotionally. And then the same goes for your work and your work-life balance. And, if your work is a mess, you're always stressed out, how is that relating to how you're functioning as a person? And then your relationships, you can really examine your friendships or your intimate relationship. And if it's causing a lot of stress, or they're really difficult, are these healthy and bringing you happiness? So I love this idea of all of these areas in our life really represent a metaphor. And in particular, as it relates to Masterclass, is our cluttered environment can really tell us about how we're functioning. So are we overwhelmed? Are we unhappy? Are we stressed? Are we focused on buying things compulsively to fill a void emotionally? Like, what is happening for us? And so I think my tip or recommendation would be to sit back and reflect a bit on your life overall. There was some research out of University of New Mexico that showed if people had high amounts of clutter, they tended to be less satisfied ultimately in their life, as well as they perceived their home in a really negative way. And so if we think of our homes being a place where we should be able to de-stress and that provide us kind of this, as we've talked about before, a sanctuary, yet if they're overly cluttered, people are feeling unhappy, not satisfied with life overall, and their perception of their home is very negative. I mean, all of that is really going to impact your mental health and your overall happiness. So I think really looking at what things in your life are bringing you happiness, and what's happening in your mental health experience that is leading you to either not address the clutter in your life or not address whether it's work or friendships, is really a key strategy.
Yeah. Well, I think what my clients ask me the most, okay, you talk about this tidying process and I'm aware of all the benefits, but I'm here, and I want to get here. How do I get from here to here? I know it can be exhausting and it'll take time and it's a process. And, I normally do it as a tailor-made suit for each client, because as we said, as you said, we are all very different, and our objectives and our lifestyle and our today is so different because, you know, we might have little kids, we might have a roommate, we might just have gotten married, and we're learning how to live with somebody else in the same space. So what I try to teach my clients, and I think it's been a great tool for them to have. I call it the happiness matrix. And I think we've all heard from the Eisenhower matrix how it's used in companies, you know, what's important and what's urgent. In my case, since I work with things and with spaces, my happiness matrix talks about what makes you happy and what do you use. Those are the two matrix, no? So it's very straightforward, and it's even very simple to when I explain it to people, and they're like, oh, because when we come to the decision-making process, I think as we've talked about during this whole masterclass, how our brain is like, can be overwhelmed and just shut down at some point. What I try to do with the happiness matrix is have a simple tool for my clients to learn on how to do this decision-making process easier, no? So we can achieve more. And how does it work? Well, we have two matrix, no? Happiness, and in the other we have use. So whatever we use and makes us happy, then that's a simple keep it, no? That goes in the keep it category. And then we go to the next category, next part of the matrix, where it's something that I use, but I don't really love. What would be an example? And I always say our frying pan, you know, because we always need something in the kitchen, and we always want to get some scrambled eggs maybe. So a frying pan could be, or one of these objects that we have in the kitchen, or even toilet paper. No, it's something we use. We don't actually really love it, but it's something we need. It's essential for our everyday life. So that's a keep, no? That's where I think a lot of people fall with the accumulation part. And that's where I tell them, okay, this is where we need to have the essentialism practice. Why? Because you don't really need 10 frying pans, no?
Right.
So that's when we go into that part of the matrix, we say, okay, this is something you use, but it's not something you love, but you don't really need 100 pairs of shoes. So that's when we hit essentialism. So so that the number of things can come down. Then the next matrix is the very easy one is something you don't love and you don't use. Please, that's easy. It's gone. No,
right.
I mean,
That's right.
The only thing we need to do is I know it's we're scared of letting go things, but that's something that you need to practice, and that's what, as a coach, as a tidying coach, that's what I try to teach you. But that's an easy let go. No, donate, give away, sell, and some things are maybe not even worth keeping because they don't no longer are useful, or they don't even work. So that's maybe trash. No. So all of those things, no, I don't use it and I don't love it. You shouldn't keep it. No, that's really easy. And then we have the fourth part of the matrix, when you say, well, it's something that I love, but I don't use. And normally your peoples are like, how do we have something that I love and I don't use? That's sentimental value items. No, we have photographs. We have a certain item that we just love or reminds us of someone, or our honeymoon, or I don't know. Then that falls into that category. That's sentimental value. The only thing I always tell people in this category is it's okay to have things that you decide to give a material object a sentimental value. That's okay, because it reminds you of someone or something important in your life. But if it's important in your life, then give it a special place. It's not valid for you to say to me, oh, this is sentimental value, but I have it inside my closet. somewhere stuck back there. Or it's, I love books and these books represent, but then I have them in a box and some storage up in the, no, then it's really doesn't really have that value. If something has a value, take it out, show it. You need to have it visible, because that's what reminds you of happy moments, of people you love. So that's like my rule in terms of keeping things that have sentimental value. I will always say, yes, you should, and we can keep things with sentimental value. The only rule that I give is that, okay, but please do give it, if it's so special, give it a special place to that thing in your space. No? Right. So that's my happiness matrix, that I think it's a way for you to find everything in your space should fall in one of those 4 categories. And I think that, as you were saying, our brain needs that structure maybe for decision making. And that's what I teach my clients. And this is what I give to you, who you're listening, this really nice tool for you to decide what to keep, what not to keep, and why you keep it.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for the tip. I think it relates so much to a similar process that we do in psychotherapy, and it is letting go of certain ideas that we've previously held that's hard to make change. And so that's what oftentimes brings people into a counseling coaching session, is that they're stuck in their life. So in this analogy, they're stuck with an item, right? Or lots of items in the clutter case. And it is hard for them to let go of, for example, that sentimental value that is placed on an item that's in the top, very back of their closet. They're holding on to it for a reason that they believe, but they're not really making use of that. And I think once people start this similar mental process and emotional process of letting go of some of these ideas and making change in their life, it is so relieving. People can feel so much better. And then they realize, were they really holding on to something, or in my case, were they really not making change with a relationship or their job or something that wasn't bringing them happiness? What was holding them stuck in that situation? But once they start rolling with making changes and letting go of things, it creates a huge ripple effect and brings on happiness. But I think the matrix and you describing those 4 categories to help people with decision making and to break down those ideas is so helpful, because it really allows us to compartmentalize, as we said, that our brains need and we need through this process, and can help people get from point A to point B, which can be really overwhelming. But I love the idea of letting go, because I think when we make any change, especially as it relates to clutter, but also our emotional and mental health, when we're making change in our life, we have to be able to let go of ideas that we've held on to that may or may not be true, but we've held on to them for so long, we're sort of stuck in our life, and it's hard to change. So yeah, I think that's really great.
Yeah. Well, I think to close this session, because our time is almost up, I always tell people, and I was telling them on this workshop on Friday I was giving, I always, because I always come in and I ask them things like, well, do you know the KonMari method, which I am a certified consultant here in Mexico City, or have you used any other methods? There are so many methods in the world, in the United States, with this organization you have in the U.S. That has so many professional organizers. There are so many methods you could just use, but I always tell people not to lie to themselves, because at the end, I really truly believe that a tidying process is not just like having all your things nice